Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the introduction to VMware NSX session. My name is Matt Stevensenis, and I head up product marketing for network and security at VMware, and I'm based out of our headquarters in Palo Alto, California. And I'm really pleased today to have Gert Pfluger, one of our top systems engineers for NSX here in Europe, joining me for this presentation today. So just to level set on what to expect. So this is an introductory session. Now, unless you've been living under a rock for the past 4 years, I'm sure you've heard of NSX. Our CEO, Pat Gelsinger, certainly talks about it a lot, was featured in many of the announcements and the solutions that he spoke about in the keynote presentation this morning. But this is really a high-level introductory session. I'm going to assume that although you might have heard of NSX, you probably don't know a lot of the details. So I really want to lay a foundation for you to start your network virtualization journey. So we'll talk about why network virtualization is so important, the problems that it solves. We'll talk about how NSX works, but from a high level, conceptual level. We've got dozens of other sessions throughout this show that go into much more technical depth. So I just wanted to make this clear that we will cover how NSX works from a high level, but I'd please encourage you to go to other sessions to learn more about the technology and the architecture and exactly how it works. We're going to focus on the use cases and the reasons why customers deploy NSX. We'll give some customer examples of some successful customers who have deployed NSX. So hopefully that will give you a good foundation of knowledge to start you on this journey towards network virtualization. Now, a little bit about myself just before we get started. While I'm a marketing guy based out of Silicon Valley now, I actually began my career as an engineer myself. I was living and working in Australia, and I was deploying data center infrastructure for a service provider down there. So back in those days, it was physical infrastructure. I was deploying physical servers, physical network equipment, physical firewalls and storage arrays into data centers. Over time, like many of you, I'm sure, that evolved into virtual infrastructure, and I became a virtualization admin and architect. And so really all of this is to say, I understand the challenges that you guys face because I faced them myself firsthand back when I was an engineer before I moved to the dark side of marketing in Silicon Valley. So let's jump into it. Now, this standard disclaimer slide, my lawyers make me put this in here. I will talk about only what's in our shipping product today. So this is what NSX can do today, but this slide is just in case I stray into the future a little bit, but I want you to be sure that what I'm talking about is actually available today. Now, before we get started, I just want to start with this quote. Mark Andreessen once said that, in short, software is eating the world. So for those that don't know Mark, he's a general partner at Andreessen Horowitz. They're a venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. He's also the co-founder of Netscape, and he's been involved in many successful Silicon Valley ventures over his career. And he was really using this quote in a slightly different context to the way that I'm going to use it today. He was talking about how software is disrupting industries and forcing businesses to develop new business models around software. The way I want to use this quote is when we think about the data center. In my view, software is eating the world of data centers as well. And this is a good thing, and I'll explain why. If we think about our data centers for a moment, there are really three basic building blocks of infrastructure when you break it down to its most simplest form. We have a compute platform, we have a storage platform, and we have a network platform, on top of which we run our applications. And so you've seen a lot of innovation and virtualization on the compute side, obviously, led by VMware over the past 15 or so years. And customers like yourselves and like myself have understood and realized the benefits of virtualizing compute, that agility, that efficiency that virtualization brings on the compute side, we're all very, very familiar with. Similarly, on the storage side, the fact that a virtual hard disk for a VM is just a file on a file system, and we can move it from one storage array to another seamlessly without downtime. Again, in the storage space, we've had that abstraction of physical and virtual for many years now. But the one piece that's been missing has been the network. Now, if we think about it, networking hasn't fundamentally changed in decades. So there've been incremental innovations. Of course, we've gone from 10 megabits per second to 100 megabits and a gig and 10 gig and beyond now. So certainly networks within the data center have become faster, but they haven't really had that innovative disruption, that virtualization that we've enjoyed on the compute and the storage side. Even if we think about SDN, software-defined networking, it's still about centralized software managing hardware. And really we like to draw the distinction between SDN and network virtualization, which is what we do with NSX, which is truly virtualizing the network and running the network functions like routing and switching and firewalling and load balancing and running them entirely in software. So we can start to gain that agility and that efficiency that we've enjoyed on the compute and storage side now for the network. If we don't do this, and maybe these challenges resonate with you guys as they resonate with me, it's really hard for us to keep up with that pace of business. The business is demanding us to be able to deploy IT services and network services very quickly. And when network changes involve racking and stacking physical hardware, plugging things in, obviously we can't keep up with that pace that the business demands of us. And what do? They look elsewhere. And as we see now, lines of businesses are starting to go around IT and consume public cloud for this very reason. Likewise, even if we think about provisioning a VLAN, so, okay, there's no physical changes that need to be made, but it's still logging into multiple switches, provisioning that VLAN, trunking it out to a router or maybe a firewall, and then provisioning firewall policy. You have to log into this other box over here to provision your load balancing policy. Even when there's no physical changes involved, our traditional network architectures are very manual and very slow. Physical networking is holding back our ability to secure our data centers also. If we think about the traditional network security model of placing perimeter firewalls at the edge of our network, the data breaches of the past sort of 3 to 5 years have really shown that attackers will figure out how to get through or around those perimeter defenses, and once they're in the data center, they're able to move from system to system laterally until they can get to the information that they're looking for and exfiltrate that data. And so when we start to virtualize our network and we can place security everywhere, we're able to stop that lateral spread of threats and protect our data centers much more effectively. Also cost. And really there's two sides to cost. There's the CapEx involved in deploying physical infrastructure, as well as the OpEx involved in managing that manual process to deploy and configure the physical infrastructure. And then if we think about public cloud, often seen as the solution to all of the world's problems, while the public cloud does solve some of the limitations and challenges that we have in the data center, okay, we no longer have to deploy physical servers and physical infrastructure. We don't have to deploy or install hypervisors, so it solves some of those challenges, but it actually introduces a number of unique challenges from the network side. Now we have to deal with multiple clouds. So it might be AWS, it might be IBM. And of course, these use different tool sets, different policies, and often require different skill sets and different people to manage each of these multiple clouds. And then, of course, this is different to our on-prem data centers running vSphere as well. So from a network perspective, we have inconsistent policies, inconsistent tools. When we're trying to automate all of this stuff, the automation teams have to deal with very different infrastructure, both physical and virtual. We did a survey recently where we surveyed our customers, so the VMware customer base, and 67% responded to say that their cloud strategy involves multiple clouds. So this is a real challenge for a lot of our customers, and I'm sure a challenge for many of you here as well. Network virtualization aims to solve all of these problems. So ultimately what we're trying to do with network virtualization and with NSX is abstract networking from the underlying infrastructure. So on the data center side, it solves our problems and our challenges that I was talking about around provisioning physical infrastructure and managing physical infrastructure. We're abstracting and we're running network functions entirely in software that were typically found in hardware in the past. And what that really gives us is the operational model of the virtual machine for the network. So we're all familiar with the operational model of the virtual machine. You can create a VM, you can delete it, you can snapshot it, you can back it up and restore it. Well, now we can do the same with our network, our entire network, not just our virtual switches, but our routers and our firewalls and our load balancers. And all of those network constructs, along with the VMs, we can manage just like a virtual machine. You know, from the cloud side, it enables us to have consistent network and security policy across these multiple clouds and across our on-prem private clouds and out to our public clouds, as Pat was mentioning this morning in the keynote presentation. We can then start to extend these network and security policies and services out to our branch offices. So many of our customers, many customers that I talk to at least, are now thinking about and talking about deploying almost miniature SDDCs, miniature software-defined data centers in their branches. And this might just be one or two servers, but when you can start to deploy x86 hardware out at your branch office and extending your network and security policies from your data center all the way out to your branches, you can really start to drive some pretty amazing agility and efficiency all the way out to the edge of your network. And of course, that allows us to start to support these new emerging workloads, whether it's IoT, whether it's containers, these new endpoints that we're being asked to deploy. We can now set ourselves up to support that in the future. And so NSX is the product from VMware that delivers on that promise of network virtualization. The vision of NSX, and when I talk about vision, this is not in the future, this is what we're delivering today. Really what we're trying to do with NSX is not just be the network virtualization platform for the VMware SDDC, but also extend out to public clouds with the work that we're doing with VMware Cloud on AWS or NSX Cloud that we've just recently announced. Multiple hypervisors as well. So NSX not only supports vSphere, but also supports KVM. We're also thinking about new application frameworks that might not be VMs, they might be containers. So if you're thinking about containerizing and modernizing your application infrastructure, you're thinking cloud native, NSX supports that too, with integrations with Kubernetes and Pivotal, for example. We can extend this, like I said, out to our branch offices and also our end users. So NSX supports integration with Horizon and with AirWatch, so we can start to extend our network and security policies to protect our end user environments as well. So that's a little bit of background as to why network virtualization is so important and the problems that we're looking to solve with NSX. Now I want to shift gears and really talk about how do we do this? How does NSX work and how does NSX deliver on that promise of network virtualization? And like I said at the beginning, I'm not going to go too deep here. We have dozens of other sessions through VMworld where we really go into the architecture and the nuts and bolts and bits and bytes of NSX, but I do want to discuss how it works, at least conceptually. And really, it starts with the existing infrastructure that you already have in place in your data center. So it's a common misconception that you need a certain type of physical hardware or a certain type of switch to do network virtualization. And you don't, at least not with NSX. So NSX will run on top of any IP network fabric. So we have many customers deploying NSX on top of existing, for example, Cisco Catalyst 6500 series switches. Or maybe you've got Nexus 2K, 5K, 9K type of architectures. In a brownfield environment, NSX will run on top of any IP network. We also see customers deploying NSX in new greenfield environments that might be on a Cisco Nexus 9K spine leaf type architecture. But because we're abstracting the networking from the hardware, you have choice. You could run any network from any vendor if you chose to. So just like, again, think about the virtual machine. When we started abstracting VMs from the underlying server hardware, it now gave us choice to deploy any servers that we want. We could swap those servers in and out without disrupting the VMs. Now we can do the same with the network through network virtualization. So on top of this physical infrastructure that we already have in place in the data center, we have our hypervisor, and I'm assuming for most of you this is probably vSphere. Now, whether you're really conscious of it or not, you're actually doing some form of network virtualization already with the vSwitch. That's a very basic form of network virtualization, but it is still networking in software. What NSX does is takes this vSwitch concept to a whole nother level. And what we're doing is inserting these network functions directly into the hypervisor. So we're doing routing, we're doing switching, load balancing, and firewalling. We're virtualizing those and running them in software in the hypervisors that you already have on top of the physical infrastructure that you already have. Now, when we're talking about the cloud, these network functions will run as a service. So you consume them as a service. So you don't have to necessarily install the pieces like you do on-prem. You just consume them like a SaaS service. So, at this point, customers, when I'm in a one-on-one conversation, often sort of ask me and challenge me, doesn't this introduce some sort of, performance impact? I'm sure some of you at least are thinking, running all these network services in the hypervisor now, isn't that going to really impact the host performance? And the answer is not really. So if you think about it, every packet already goes through the hypervisor. So the hypervisor already processes every packet that's coming in and out of that host. And so by adding these network functions, it's only really a small incremental hit on the CPU. So single-digit percentage points on the CPU impact. But what you can start to do now that you're running these services in the hypervisor is pretty awesome from a networking perspective. So think about this scenario. You've got two VMs on the same host. They might be on the same VLAN, maybe not. And you want to firewall the two. Now the way that you do that now is the traffic has to leave the host from one VM, go out through the host, go out through the network, maybe switched multiple times, it might hit a router, it might not, gets to the firewall, and then hairpins all the way back to that same host to the VM that's sitting right next to it. That's the only way that you can firewall two VMs from each other currently. If they're sitting on the same VLAN, there's actually no way to firewall those two VMs. They can always talk to each other across layer 2. Well, if we run firewalling in the hypervisor, and every packet from every VM has to go through the hypervisor, we can now start to firewall and protect every single workload in the environment in the hypervisor. So the traffic doesn't even have to leave the host. So we can start to really reduce that amount of what we call east-west traffic going across the network by running some of these services like routing and firewalling in the hypervisor. So we have a small incremental impact in terms of the host performance and the CPU, but we can have a huge impact on the network performance itself and really start to optimize those east-west traffic flows across the network. Now, the other thing that I'd like to point out is this works like a distributed system too. So we're adding these network services into every hypervisor across the entire data center. So as you scale your VM infrastructure, so you add a new host to add VM capacity, you're adding network and security capacity as well. So every time you add a new host to add VM capacity, you're adding another 20 gigabits per second of firewalling, for example. So these network and security functions scale as your infrastructure scales. And it works like a distributed system. So rather than having these choke points in the network, these physical boxes that traffic has to go through, we can now distribute that evenly across our data centers. So those are network functions. And really what this gives us logically is a platform, like a network hypervisor, you could think of it as, on top of which we run our workloads. So these could be VMs, like I mentioned. They could be containers. They could be entire network constructs, multi-tier applications with multiple tiers of routing and switching, firewalling and load balancing that all make up part of an application. And so essentially, like I mentioned earlier, we get that, essentially it's functionally equivalent to the operational model of the VM. So you can start to provision these networks in seconds, delete them just as quick. From a DR perspective, we can now start to back up and restore the network just as if they were VMs. Now, as we start thinking about disaster recovery or multiple sites, one of the challenges, as I'm sure many of you are aware of, is, okay, we've got some very good technology now to replicate our storage from one site to another. And that was okay back in the day where applications were single VMs and we had these monolithic applications running on a single server. And disaster recovery basically meant making sure the storage was replicated and we bring the VM up. Well, applications are much more distributed than that these days, and they involve multiple VMs and multiple network constructs. So being able to back up and restore the network, just like a virtual machine, in the case of a disaster, is hugely compelling for many of our customers. So at this point, I'd like to ask Gert Pfluger to come up. As I mentioned, Gert is one of our lead systems engineers for NSX here in Europe. And he's going to take you through some of the use cases and the reasons why customers are deploying NSX and talk to you about a few of those customers and exactly what they're doing. NSX has been around for 4 years now. We launched it back at VMworld in 2013. And so we have thousands of customers using NSX. And so what we've found is the reasons why they deploy really start to center around 3 key themes: security, automation, and application continuity. And so Gert's going to take you through these use cases and how these customers are using NSX.
Thank you, Matt. Now you have the challenge to go from a very nice, formulated and sounding Australian accent to a hard German accent. I apologize for this, but you will make it. Because I will put a little bit more technical meat onto the bone, and we'll go by the 3 main use cases. So our 3 main use cases, which we always teach and present, are security, automation, and application continuity. So that's the main pillars, and that's the best use case. You can also think about your own problem. So while I present, think about your own situation and figure out if this is a use case which hits you. Going back to the microsegmentation security use case, that's a real boomer. Because as Matt said, nobody can do this like we do. Because you can imagine now you have a firewall in front of every VNIC. So you have a virtual machine with the connection to the network, with the VNIC, the virtual network card, and this is connected to a virtual firewall, a distributed virtual firewall, where you can control all the traffic going in and out of this virtual machine. If you try to do this in physics, it's not scalable. If it's scalable, you will not pay for this. So that's the only way to really control the traffic from a VM to a VM. And even if you sit, like in this example here, on the same broadcast domain, with the normal broadcast domain, you can never control the traffic in between a virtual machine and the other virtual machine. Now you have the control point really to bring in your security policies and filter all the traffic in a stateful way. And you think, perhaps it's much too complicated to manage all these different firewalls. It's a distributed firewall which comes together at the vCenter, and you have one rule set which you distribute in your network. So even the scaling and the management is solved. So, and there's also some advantages. They are even bigger than the pure security case. It could be also connected to other tools from VMware. Think about mobile devices and applications on this mobile device. So you can identify the user and the application, and then map this to a security rule, which will be filtered then in the virtual before and to the virtual machine. So you can really do filtering from a mobile device end to end into an application running in your data center. So all the breaches you normally have, because if you do a VPN into a data center, you open up every communication from this mobile device to everything in your data center. But now you have a full control. And to make this relevant to you, I have a few use cases talking about about the security example. In this case, we choose some European use cases to make it more relevant for you. And in this case, it's the Catalanian tax agency. So these guys are collecting 2.5 billion euro per year from the taxpayers. And they have like 53 offices here in Catalonia. And they started to think about microsegmentation in the moment they had to move the data center. And as they had to move the data center, they want to do two things. This was on their most important point list: seamless and secure. And we came in and showed how NSX helps with the app continuity, helps to do this seamless. So migrating from a old style bare metal environment into a virtualized data center, and then migrate also to microsegmentation. So this was the most important part for them. So what they get out of this was more security, because you can imagine that whenever it's financial, there's your personal data involved, there's your tax record involved. Nobody wants to see this somewhere on a database in the internet. So security was their target, and they reached this with NSX. Then they also figured out it's very fast to do this in software. So beside of programming the security policies, they can do what Matt said. They can create, configure, and then if you don't need this anymore, delete the stuff. And you see the quote from one of the head of the infrastructure. They really like this solution when it comes to microsegmentation. Next pillar we always stress with NSX is that you have very good automation possibilities. There's one more VMware specific. We have tools like vRealize automation, which helps you in a very, let's say, wizard kind of form to automate virtual machines. But if you're more on the side of the open source, we also offer this to you. We offer OpenStack. And we recently announced in Las Vegas, like 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, VIO 4.0, which is VMware integrated OpenStack, which is compatible to Okata. So that's the latest version of OpenStack. And the good thing is now with 4.0, you can also use the rules from the vRealize automation with OpenStack, and you can also use from vRealize the API from OpenStack. So there's a little bit connection in between the two products. A very good customer for this example is Amadeus, and I'm really happy to have this as an example, because I did in my former life, I was a Cisco system engineer, and I did like 10 years of work with Amadeus, which was always fun. These guys are located in Erding, but they have their data center beside of Erding, which is one of the largest data centers in Germany. They have this in Sydney and Miami. And especially if you think today about Miami, then So they use automation for migrating workloads in and out, or create new workloads very fast. And actually, if you think about what is Amadeus doing, they are one of the biggest travel booking suppliers in the world. They're a competitor with Sabre. They have their focus on Europe, Asia Pac, and a little bit South America. So they're comparable with Sabre. And if you are in a travel booking system, then you have to be high available. So the 99.999% availability is important. You have to be fast and you have to be secure. So that was the reason why they started to think about OpenStack. And in the beginning, the Amadeus guys thought about KVM and OpenStack. But then at the end, they decided to use our stuff to do automation, and especially because they are going into this new area of containers, they figure out that's a very attractive use case to automate also containers. So that's one of the examples for automation. And if you look then for app continuity, you see in this example here, you have a site on the left-hand side where your services are running the apps. And whenever you trigger this manually or automatically, they can go seamless to the recovery site. Seamless means you don't have to take care about IP addressing or the infrastructure. Everything will be created automatically and gives you a much higher availability for this. And as we created this presentation for you, we thought about what is a good use case really to show this. And then we Matt and myself choose a Swiss insurance company, because nothing is more reliable and more important than a Swiss insurance company. And we choose Helvetica. Helvetica is one of the most well-known insurance companies out of and Switzerland and located in St. Gallen. And they have a major data center in the capital and a lot of data centers all over the world. And these guys are really, really addicted to the topic of high availability and security. So as we started to talk to these customers, we figured out for them life becomes much more easier, because in the past they had also availability over different data centers, but they had to manually change IP addressing for the workloads and also for the security policies. And now with the NSX and app continuity, everything is automated. So whenever you move by manual an application into a new data center, the security will also follow. And if you have really a disaster, then everything will work automatically. So hopefully this little repeat of the different use cases and technology helps you to find your own use case. We would love to discuss your use case while we are here in Barcelona. So use Matt and myself to do some discussion or talk to your account team about these use cases. We are more than happy to discuss this with you and plan for you. And then also what I always recommend is either do a proof of concept, or at least please go to the hands-on labs and do your testing. We have these use cases prepared for you. You can go there and test this, real test. And this gives you a little bit more insight in the technology. And with this, I hand over again to Matt.
Thank you, Gert. Really appreciate that. So, folks, hopefully, like Gert said, this helps to put some meat on the bones, so you can start to understand a bit more about the technology and how customers are using it. But like I said earlier, please go see some of the other, or go and attend some of the other NSX sessions that go into much more of the technical detail, so you can really understand how it works and how you can get value out of it. So NSX really is a true platform. And we're virtualizing the network. We're creating essentially that network hypervisor and that NSX platform that our partners can start to plug in some of their technology as well. And so we've, over the past 4 years, built a rich partner ecosystem with many of the vendors that I'm sure you use in your own environments. Now, what I want to stress with this partner ecosystem is, this is not just certified to work on top of NSX. these are partners that are truly integrating with NSX across multiple technology domains. So from a network infrastructure perspective, for example, many of our physical switching partners have integrations with NSX where you can terminate an NSX virtual network onto one of their physical switches. So many of you might still have a few physical workloads kicking around in your environment. Hopefully we're close to 100% virtualized, but we understand that that's not the reality for most customers. And so what you can do here is, we call it the hardware VTEP, where you can terminate that NSX virtual network onto a physical switch. So you can connect physical workloads directly into the NSX virtual networks. From a networking and security services perspective, what we can do with NSX is dynamically insert, using service insertion, next generation firewalls, for example. Or we can insert agentless antivirus capabilities. So we can start to do things like, if a virus is detected on a VM, we can trigger NSX to go and insert IPS from one of our partners dynamically into that network flow. Or from a next generation firewalling perspective, in many environments, if we think about PCI compliance, for example, where you need next generation firewall and IPS to separate your cardholder data environment from your non-cardholder data environment, we can now dynamically insert that NGFW in virtual directly into an NSX network. And of course, we have a number of orchestration and management systems, as well as operations and visibility platforms that all interoperate to help you manage and gain visibility into your NSX environment. So NSX enables us to take a pretty big step forward in terms of our IT. But it's not just about the technology. So I think we've demonstrated today that clearly there's some technology advantages behind NSX, and I hope that you'll learn more about it here at the show and beyond as you embark on your own network virtualization journeys. But we're also seeing customers using NSX to help break down these traditional silos that we've had in IT and create cross-functional teams that work together on this common infrastructure and start to automate some of their manual processes that they've traditionally had, and ultimately create this culture where IT becomes much more agile. So let me be clear here, because there's often a misconception, especially from networking folks, where they think that because NSX runs the networking software, that we're now handing the network over to the virtualization guys. And that's just not the case. NSX is still networking. It's still routing and switching and all of that networking stuff, and it requires networking expertise to run it. But what we see our customers, as successful customers, doing is when they embrace that NSX mindset, they start to bring these teams together and create these cross-functional teams that work together to build this infrastructure that's automated and to ultimately add more value back into the business. So I wanted to be clear there is this is not about the networking folks handing over control of the network to the virtualization guys. It's about us all working together. So in terms of customers and the momentum that we're seeing in the market with NSX, like I said, launched back in 2013 at VMworld, so we've got 4 years under our belt now. So the product has matured significantly during that time, and the customer adoption has been growing exponentially. We now have over 2,800 customers with NSX across all industries, all market verticals, and all sizes. Customers with as few as 3 hosts up to many thousands of hosts. So NSX is able to scale from the very small all the way up to the very large. And these are not just in test environments as well. We're seeing over 2, it's almost 3 now, new production deployments of NSX coming online every day. So these are being deployed in production environments to support mission-critical applications. From a certifications perspective, I certainly built my career off the back of VMware and becoming that virtualization admin. And we're now seeing folks take that step in terms of network virtualization as well. And we have over 8,800 certified NSX professionals through our VCP NV certification program. They're starting to embrace that NSX mindset and build their career or take that next step in their career with NSX, making themselves more employable and worth more to their organizations. Like I mentioned, we're seeing NSX deployed across all industries. I'm not going to spend too much time here, but NSX is not just focused on one of these verticals. We see deployments across all industry verticals. So you're not alone here. We're here to help on this virtualization journey, network virtualization journey that you're about to embark on. Like I mentioned, we have thousands of customers already doing this. We've got professional services to help you. We have training, like I said, through the VCP-NV, and we're developing a pretty vocal and engaged community through the VMUG program of network virtualization folks getting together to help each other out from a user community perspective. Now, we're almost done. I want to do something fun here if you guys are still engaged and still with me before I close off. We're running a campaign right now called NSX in the Wild. And if you wear some NSX gear, you've got an NSX sticker or some merchandise, take a photo of it, tag it on social media with hashtag NSX in the Wild, and you can win some pretty cool prizes. So if you guys don't mind, can I take a selfie? And even though I'm not eligible to win these prizes, I'd like to kick off that campaign right now. Is that cool? You guys with me? Or is everyone asleep? Hopefully it's first morning. We shouldn't be too hungover and asleep just yet. I'm going to use the poor man's flash here and turn this screen to white. Is everyone awake and engaged enough? Can we throw our hands in the air? Come on, you can do better than that. Let's do it. All right, let me just check that. Sweet, we're looking good. Thanks, folks. Appreciate that. Just a bit of fun. As I said, hashtag NSX in the Wild if you've got NSX gear. I've actually, don't tell anyone, I'm not supposed to do this, but I've got a bunch of NSX swag down here to give away. During the Q&A at the end, which will start in just a couple of minutes, if you ask a question, I'd be happy to give you some NSX gear, and please take a photo of yourself and tag it with this hashtag. Before we jump into Q&A though, I just want to give you some resources to help you get started. So like I said, we have the VMUG community that's a really engaged bunch of people helping each other out on their network virtualization questions and their journey. So please engage there. A bunch of NSX resources. We've got a blog that's very active. We've got free hands-on labs. You can take them here at VMworld, or afterwards they're just online and they're free. You can take them anytime you want, get your hands dirty on NSX without having to install anything. It's running from our own cloud back at our data centers. There's dozens of other sessions. We've got demos in the booth. There's technical, meet the experts. You can go down there and talk one-on-one with people that really understand this stuff. And there's the training and certification, like I mentioned. Before we finish off, they always make us talk about the survey. Please do fill out the survey, though. We want to hear back from you. Was this the right level of content? Did you learn something today? Please give us that feedback. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. Thank you. So I think we have about 15 minutes left and would love to do some Q&A. Like I said, I've got NSX giveaways here. There should be some microphones roaming around. If you have a question, please throw your hand up and we'll get you a microphone so it's on the recording. We've got one down here if there's a mic. Actually, do you want to ask me the question? I'll just repeat it for now.
You mentioned that NSX creates extra load to hypervisor. Can you give a percentage how much resources we have to dedicate to NSX?
In terms of hardware resources?
Yes.
So NSX just runs in your existing vSphere hosts or your existing vSphere or KVM hosts. So you don't necessarily dedicate any resources to NSX at all. It runs on your existing hypervisors, your existing hosts. So my point about the performance was sometimes people think because you're running these advanced network functions in the hypervisor that it must have a huge performance on the host, and it doesn't. So you don't need to dedicate any resources. It's just what you already have. Does that make sense? Yeah? And there's some NSX stuff. Good. Do you want to hand out the NSX gear? Thanks. Another question? Was the question, which version of vSphere do you require to support NSX?
Use NSX?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear the question. Was it the version of vSphere that's required?
Yeah.
Okay. So NSX will work on vSphere 5.5 and above. So hopefully you're at least at 5.5. If not, I would be worried. Of course, with the newer versions of vSphere, you get new vSphere capabilities. That gives us new NSX capabilities as well. But as long as you at least have 5.5, you can run NSX. Thank you. Another question here?
Okay.
Sorry.
I just learned a few days ago that Cisco began to introduce ACI. And do you plan some connection with this? Because now we have ACI on the Cisco level, then we have NSX on the VMware level. They will be connected somewhere, or you don't plan any kind of such kind of things?
So the question was about Cisco announced ACI in the cloud just recently. So, you know, the way that we view this space is, if you think about it, you know, you can't deploy hardware in the cloud. So networking has to be done in software. So ultimately what we're doing with NSX, and you saw that sort of wheel slide that I had up there, is we want to have that consistent networking security across any environment, whether it's cloud or on-prem, and we don't want it to be tied to any sort of hardware. So we have a lot of customers running NSX on top of ACI. That's a very solid use case. There's customers that really love their Cisco environment, and they're using ACI in that instance as a physical fabric management, and it works great. And they run NSX on top of that. So you can certainly run NSX on ACI. In terms of what they're doing in the cloud, I mean, I can't really speak to that, not being from Cisco, but we certainly have customers deploying both.
Perhaps I can give you a little bit of background here. The integration of the ACI into the cloud, you have to ask the Cisco team how deep this is and what they really do. So that's one question, and then you have 3 deployment possibilities. You can run ACI on the hardware. You can run a normal hardware with no ACI, and you can put NSX on top of both ideas. So, but it's a little bit, for me, it's, off the records, it's too much over the top to combine both of the solutions. So you should look at what you really need and then make a decision for one or the other solution. It's perfect to run NSX on Nexus 9000 because this is a rock solid environment, great price point for 10 gig. So our recommendation would be natively NSX on Nexus 9000, but you have the choice.
Yeah, we certainly have a lot of customers deploying both NSX and ACI, and from our perspective, they solve different problems. So it's a decision about what problem are you trying to solve, and is both the right answer or one or the other. Yep.
So who do you see as a competition?
So it's funny, when we talk about competition, we actually say that our biggest competitor is people doing nothing. It's status quo. It's like, we're comfortable with plugging in cables and deploying physical stuff, and that's honestly our biggest competitor. There is no other vendor out there doing the same thing that we're doing. We're the only network virtualization software that can run in the vSphere hypervisor. It's our hypervisor, we own it, and so we have complete access to it. There really are no competitors doing exactly what we do. It's more about, are you ready to embrace this NSX mindset, and are you ready to, start to virtualize your network? You do have to do things a little differently. Just like we had to with moving from physical servers to virtual servers. Over time we realized the agility and the efficiency that brought us. Now it's about doing the same thing on the network.
So for me, it's the discussion. For me, it's the discussion not about the competitor, it's more like the feature. So we invented a microsegmentation, and now the market really adopt this term and call everything microsegmentation. So for me, you have to be really careful and make a good comparison, what's in it for you. So look deeply into the definition of microsegmentation and then make your choice.
Is there a way?
So who was the question?
Sorry, put your hand up and we'll get the microphone to you. So, yep, question.
Yeah. So we had the same discussion that you said with our networking team, and no matter what we said, they always said, we don't want this no virtualization for a network. Is there any like kicker argument that you can give us, and for the final point in winning them over? It's not about taking anything away from them, but it's about winning them over.
Yeah. So I'm assuming you're on the virtualization side or the server side of the business. Obviously, there's a huge advantage in NSX for you guys in terms of being able to get your networks up quicker to support your workloads. So the question is, how do we get the network guys engaged and get them excited about it? I think the first point to make, and I sort of tried to discuss it in that slide about cross-functional teams, is, it's not about them giving control of the network across to you guys. So while, the management user interfaces within vCenter, there's role-based access control, and they can have access to manage the network and security functions just like they do now. And so, yeah, things change a little bit. It's a different interface, but they're still ultimately the ones that, own the network architecture and how it works. For them, they can start doing things much more agile and much more automated and deliver networking services to the business. I think, we did a study a while ago, actually it was last year, and I spoke about it at VMworld last year, where what we found was the average time to get a VM online in production for our enterprise customers was 21 days. And so, as a VI admin, you know that you can spin up a VM in minutes. It's all of the network and security services that come along with it can give that, lead time of multiple weeks. So, I think it's a few things. It's about, letting them, making sure they understand that they still own the network and they still own the pieces, and they can work closely with you guys, and ultimately that means all of IT can deliver much more value to the business much faster. Yep.
Again, coming back to the, again, Cisco ASI features, and going to the user cases that you told, what is the main user case that the NSX is stronger than Cisco ASI? Why the customers are buying NSX instead of Cisco ASI?
Yeah, so really the three leading use cases for customers deploying NSX were those three that we spoke about. So security, automation, and app continuity. Now 70% of our customers deploy NSX for security. So security is the leading use case. It's a very easy and tangible one. Microsegmentation just makes total sense. Now, even though 70% of customers deploy NSX for microseg, most also then use it for automation and application continuity as well. So it depends on your strategy and what you're trying to do with your infrastructure. Many justify the license cost for the security benefit they get from microseg, and then they get all of those other benefits as well. But other customers sometimes are looking for automation as the primary use case, or maybe there's been a disaster event and improving your application continuity is where you want to start, and there might be budget for that. So it depends, but it mainly revolves around security, automation, and app continuity as the leading use cases.
And the most important point for me again is we own the hypervisor. And luckily or unfortunately, the competition don't have a hypervisor. So all the features come with the hypervisor, and again, make your own judgment.
Thank you.
So from a PCI perspective, this makes so much sense. But with that is usually a slow adoption into the cutting edge. So is there ways to bring NSX into those secure environments and leverage those features, even though sometimes the technology at the edge is a little slow?
Yeah. So a point that we didn't make, but I think is super important is when you install NSX, let's say you're doing security and microsegmentation, you can install NSX in a hypervisor and not apply any policy to begin with, and start with just a portion of your environment, maybe one application or one cluster or one type of workload. So with NSX, one of the other awesome things about running in the hypervisor is you have visibility and context of what's running above. So that the operating system of the VM, the machine name, the compliance scope that it's in. Some of these attributes of the VMs, you can start building your security policy around that instead of IP address port protocol. With microsegmentation, like I said, you can you install the NSX in the hypervisor, but then you can start to microsegment one workload at a time, one application at a time, however you want to do that. We have a number of tools as well to help you get started. So within NSX, there's this feature called Application Rule Manager. And what it does is you can select a VM or a bunch of VMs that represent an application, and it will map out all the network communications and the network flows between those VMs. You can actually just right-click on that and create firewall policy directly from there. So it can map out those network flows, map out the firewall policy, and with like one click, create the firewall rule set to help you get started. That's just a feature that's part of NSX. And we have vRealize Network Insight, which is a tool that's part of the vRealize family of products that can do similar things in terms of give you visibility of all of the VMs in your environment, even before NSX is installed. And that can help you operationalize much faster as well. So hopefully they help. I think we had a question here.
Yep. What are the main differences between designing a traditional network and NSX network? I guess this is a completely different thing. I mean, a high level, like segmentation, IP addressing, and things like that.
Yeah.
How do we start?
So I'll take a swipe at answering this, and then maybe let Gert, fill in the details. But I guess fundamentally, from an architecture perspective, your physical network really just becomes a very simple IP backplane. So you don't need to do anything that's very complex in the physical network. You can have just some pretty basic layer 2 connectivity and do all of that networking intelligence in software within NSX. Now from a segmentation perspective, so the traditional way that we've segmented our networks is VLANs. And that comes with its own operational challenges in terms of scalability and manageability, creating VLANs and trunking them into firewalls and that sort of thing. So now we can actually start to have much flatter networks. So we can have more VMs in the same layer 2 VLAN essentially, and do micro-segmentation with NSX. So even though you've got a bunch of VMs sitting on one VLAN, they still can't talk to each other because you do that micro-segmentation in the hypervisor. So it does change the way you architect the physical network, changes the way you architect the virtual network, and the way that you would map out a security policy. Gert, do you want to add to that?
If you start with NSX, the only requirement really is to have IP connectivity. So if you can ping from left to right, you're halfway there. Then you have to have a little bit on the overhead, like MTU size with 1600 bytes, and that's the only requirement. So you can start with your existing environment and migrate out of this existing environment if you really want to or have to. What our recommendation is that we also recommend like spine and leaf, because if you want to bring more bandwidth, you put a spine. If you want to bring more ports, you add a leaf. That's obvious. But the cool thing is really you have an infrastructure. You can leverage this infrastructure and run this for a couple of years more, even if end of support of this infrastructure, and bring all the cool features into this virtualization level. That's really straightforward. And you don't have to do a big bang, do everything over the weekend. So you can really start small. And we have this edges or gateways into the physical world. Either it could be a virtual machine, or Matt talked about this, that we have partners, hardware vendors, which do this kind of bridging between VLAN and VXLAN. So it's a really no-brainer to start from small to 100% of your network.
Yep. Can we get some mic volume on the handheld?
Hello? Maybe related to the last subject, are there any third-party vendors that lock you in the technology or lock you out the technology of this?
I'm sorry, third-party vendors that...
Yeah, lock you into this technology or lock you out, like something you need to be aware of when choosing this functionality.
I'm not sure what the question is.
I understand the question that where's the lock-in here? And the lock-in is everywhere whenever you choose a major vendor. There is no free lunch. Whenever you choose Arista as a vendor, you will use some Arista specific features will lock you in a little bit. If you take Cisco as a vendor, you're going to use ACI, what have you, it will lock you in. And even if you use NSX, we will lock you in a little bit because you have to use our licenses to bring these features to your network. So there is no free choice. So you have to pick your pain and make the best decision when it comes to cost, flexibility, security, and all the use cases we have.
So what we're trying to do from that perspective is, as you saw with the partner ecosystem, I mean, the lock-in is the fact that the network fabric is NSX, and the network fabric has to be from some vendor. But what we're doing is working very closely with our ecosystem partners to make sure that they can integrate and be inserted into the right places, and so you can do things much more efficiently and effectively. Like you can insert next-gen firewall dynamically into the network. You just can't do that in physical. Whether it's agentless antivirus with, say, McAfee, so instead of running AV agents inside the VMs, we can now offload that to a service VM, some of these sorts of things. So, I mean, you're locked in from a certain extent, but we're also trying to insert those partner services so they can, work better in your environment.
I see a little bit of a help here if it comes to this discussion. If you see the next version of NSX, NSXT has a KVM hypervisor in there. You can use OpenStack to automate this. It gives you a little bit more independence and flexibility. Perhaps you have to respect this, but this is something which you can really discuss with your account teams, and we are here to really consult you. We are not only the sales machine, we also have your value and your advantage in mind. So most probably, if you talk to your account team, they will consult you to one or another solution, and then you have to pick.
Okay, great discussion. Really appreciate everyone, but we're getting kicked off stage. We've gone over time. Thank you very much. We'll hang around if you want to have a one-on-one conversation as well. Thank you.
Thank you.